Hello everyone and welcome to this July video, which is supposed to be about our subscription coffees, which it will be, but I'm supposed to taste it with a friend, and I don't have any more friends because of the corona situation. So I figured instead of doing that, I would like to do a cupping session with you guys, because I think that cupping is a great way to assess coffees and to learn a little bit more about coffee flavor, and also challenging yourself into describing coffee flavor. So if you don't know what a cupping is, this is the kind of professional way of tasting coffee. So for instance, when I travel to Kenya, I would cup several hundreds of coffees every year, and then select what I want to buy from the different cooperatives and so on. And one cooperative might have, 3, 4, 5 different outturns or lots of coffee, and I will cup all of them and then maybe select the one that I prefer, that I like the most. It might not be the best coffee for you, but for me it's the best coffee. So preference plays a role here. But cupping is basically the same method as French press and steeped coffee, or kokekaffe as we call it in Norway, where you basically boil water in a kettle and you add coffee and you wait a little bit, and then you stir a little bit, and then the coffee grounds fall to the bottom, and then you can actually drink the clear coffee from the top. In cup tasting, cupping is short for cup tasting. So this is basically, we do the same. We have coffee grounds in the cup and we pour water on, wait a little bit and then stir and so on. So I'll show you how it's done. First of all, you need at least 2 or more coffees to do an efficient cup tasting. And of course today we're going to taste all 3 coffees that we're going to send out to everyone. But I highly recommend go and get a really bad coffee. It could be a really dark roast, it could be a Robusta, it could be a really low quality Brazilian coffee or something like that. And then pair that next to these coffees so that you can really taste the difference between a higher quality Kenyan coffee and then a Brazilian or something that is very, very different and contrasting. Preferably a coffee with low acidity like India or Brazil. I'm not saying that all Indian and Brazilian coffees are bad, because they're not. So you could also get a very high quality Brazilian or high quality Indian coffee. They tend to have very low acidity, which makes a great contrast to these very fruity coffees that we're going to taste today. If you can't access these kind of things, just buy a blend in the supermarket or something, and then you'll be able to taste a huge difference between these coffees. So let's talk about ratio. Ratio means how much coffee to water we use. So in my cup, if you're unsure what you need similar cups or glasses that can take heat, Duralex glasses or your favorite coffee cups or something. If you're unsure how much they actually can contain, I normally will put them on a set of scales and tear the scale, and then basically just fill the cup more or less to the brim. And then you can measure, okay, this can take probably 200 mils if I fill it to the brim, but at the moment it's 180 grams of water in it. So normally our ratio is 6 grams to 100 grams of water. So that's 60 grams per liter, more or less. So if your cup can contain 200 grams of water, then you can use 12 grams of coffee. If it's 150 grams of water, you can use 9 grams of coffee, and so on. So that's the kind of ratios we use. So you would just measure up the amount of coffee you can use according to how big your cup is. You need a couple of spoons, and it doesn't need to be these fancy cupping spoons. It can also be like a soup spoon or something. And then you need, if you want to spit, you need something to spit into, either the sink or a glass or something. Bear in mind that in this corona period, you shouldn't do this with another person. And if you do, that you should have a separate set of cups so that you don't have to mix your spoons into other people's coffees and so on. You have to be very, very careful about this. All right, so I pre-measured actually 3 coffees that we're going to taste, and my water. How hot should the water be? Well, I like to actually bring it to the boil and pour it straight off the boil into the cup. And if your water is very hard, you need to soften it by filtering it through some kind of water filtration system, or use reverse osmosis water, or bottled water that is low in mineral content. If the mineral content is very high, especially calcium carbonate, these coffees are going to taste terrible. They're just going to taste very chalky and woody and not great. But if the water is soft and nice, you'll get a very poppy acidity and a lot of fruit flavor. And before I pour the water, we can also talk about grind setting, because I did measure extraction on different grind settings here. So if you have one of these Comandante grinders, I highly recommend doing 22 clicks off from the 0 point. You can also experiment a little bit, but around 22 clicks. So maybe slightly finer, 21 to 20, but 22 clicks work really well for these coffees for me. If you have the Wilfa uniform grinder, I recommend grinding on setting 18. That was the best for me. And also if you have this old Wilfa grinder, find the place where it says AeroPress, where there's a little dot with a line underneath, and go 1, 2, 3 dots coarser. And that's a very, very good setting for cupping on this grinder. And you can basically use the same grind setting for most coffees. When you do it like this, you know, if it's slightly finer or slightly coarser, it's not a huge difference. Just make sure you don't grind too coarse or too fine. If it's too coarse, the coffee is going to taste thin. If it's too fine, you might not actually get water into all the coffee, because they will get clumpy. So you will have an uneven extraction. All right, I'll tear my scale, start pouring the water. And it's okay here as well. If, like now I'm starting with 11 grams. And I'm trying to aim for somewhere between 180 and 190 grams of water. It's okay if it's 182 or 191, you know, it won't make a huge difference for this kind of cupping, because we're basically just gonna taste the difference between 3 different coffees. If I do production cupping, for instance, where I check the quality of our roasts, it's extremely important that we have the same measurements for all coffees. And that's because we want to taste the difference in roast and not the difference in ratios. Right, and it's wise to have a little bit of water for your spoons, so you can rinse them. And now you can also, if you want to, you can set the timer to 4 minutes. But you know, I've been measuring extraction many times in these kind of cupping bowls, and if it's sitting there for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, it doesn't make a huge difference, to be honest. So just let it sit for, you know, 3, 4, or 5 minutes, whatever suits you. And then afterwards, we're going to stir in the top of the crust. You might want to smell then, and then we can taste. All right, now to talk a little bit about the coffees we're going to send out, because we do have some really, really nice coffees for the summer. And of course, it's the time of the year where the fresh Kenyan coffees have finally arrived. We had a little bit of delay this year in the shipping, not because the milling and stuff went wrong. It was just the actual boat took a longer time than expected. So we were expecting this coffee to actually arrive in May, but it just arrived, and as we speak, and now it's 17th of June. So yeah, I don't know why, but for some reason the shipping line was a little bit delayed, probably because of the coronavirus and lack of, you know, traffic on the sea. But they finally arrived. We bought quite a lot of different lots from Kenya this year. So we bought, I think, 4 lots from Karinga, which is a factory in the area that you have tasted before, maybe. We bought a fantastic lot from a factory called Gachatha, which we have had before, but it's now back with us again. And then we bought some coffees from an estate called Kiahia, which is in the area. I haven't been there, and I haven't gotten a lot of information about that estate yet. But we decided, it was just 10 bags, so we decided to buy it through a new importer or exporter that we're actually working with a little bit, because we want to kind of try to establish some kind of relationship with a small farm in Kenya. And it's been quite hard to actually get to that point, but hopefully in the future we can establish something. But before I talk more about the coffees, let's say it's 3-4 minutes now. Now we can just stir a little bit in the top to get the crust to fall down. And of course I was shaking the table, so you can see some of the crust was already breaking by itself. That's fine. And just stir in the top. This one is quite dark roast, so 3 times in the top. And now you can see this kind of foam forming on the top. Just use a spoon and rinse that. And if you think this technique is difficult, you can just blow a little bit on the cup and then collect foam with a spoon and throw that out. If you're wondering why we're removing the foam, a lot of people think that looks very sexy, especially in a French press. If you're wondering why we remove it, just have a little taste of it. It's It's very, very bitter. It has a lot of coffee grounds in it, and it doesn't give you a very clean and nice drinking experience. Unless you kind of like to chew coffee, then, you know, go ahead and drink it. For me, not so much. Now, they're way too hot to taste immediately, so I recommend actually using the timer, putting it on when you pour the water, and then wait, depending on how hot it is in your room, but at least wait 15 minutes before you start tasting. And the reason for that is when you start tasting when it's super hot, you're not going to taste a lot of this coffee. It's going to taste a little bitter and thin and strange. As it cools, you're going to get a lot more fruit flavor, a lot more sweetness, a lot more body. So you can cup it until it becomes extremely cold, like room temperature. And the coffee will change a little bit during that time. So I highly recommend tasting it throughout that period. All right, on to the coffees. So the first coffee we're going to send out to everyone who subscribes with us is the coffee from Gachatha, which is a washing station in Nyeri, very close to Karatina. And this coffee was, I think, the best coffee we bought from Kenya this year. Consistently, it was much richer and fruitier and very, very intense. And it has this kind of buttery aromatics, like melted butter when you grind the coffee. That is just lovely. And this is kind of something that I recognize in coffees that I tend to score very high. They normally have this kind of intensity of fruit and this slightly buttery smell. Gachatha is a washing station, and there's several hundreds of farmers delivering coffee cherries to this station. And then the coffee is processed on the station in bulk, and they produce different lots. And this outturn was delivered in week 20 after the harvest started. So when you cup coffee, you just take a little bit in your spoon and you slurp it just to get some air into your kind of mouth. And that air will then travel up to your nose, and then you can smell the different flavors. So the coffee from Gachatha, super kind of soft mouthfeel. The acidity is a little tart, so it really reminds me of very, very ripe blackcurrants. There's some other berries that I can't remember the name of. They're a little bit bigger and also purple, called arunia berries or something like that. Really, really nice. Very intense, very kind of rounded body, sweet. This kind of blackcurrant bush in the finish. Yeah, it's high in acidity, but it's not unpleasant. It's kind of like drinking a red wine that has a little bit of a, you know, more like a Rioja wine maybe, Spanish Tempranillo grapes or something. Very powerful and still has acidity, but it has a lot of flavor and stuff to back it up with. So everyone will get a bag of this. And then if you subscribe to 2 or more bags, you will also get a bag of coffee from Karinga, which is... This is a factory, or washing station we call it. It's called factory in Kenya. But it's basically a place where the farmers deliver and sell their cherries, and the cherries get depulped and processed and dried on that factory. And that factory is normally part of a cooperative. So this is from Karinga. We've had that a couple of years in a row. And this is quite high altitude coffee, which you can kind of taste because the acidity is a little bit more intense. Maybe a little bit more floral. Still has this kind of blackcurrant, blackberry, rose hip flavor. Maybe a little bit of raisins, a little bit of wininess. But the body is a little bit more kind of maybe transparent and elegant than the Gachatha. Slightly higher acidity. I really love this coffee. Super nice. Both of these will make a great iced coffee. So if you have a hot summer day, brew them hot, cool them down, maybe add a little bit of honey or sugar, and then, you know, that's perfect. Third coffee we're going to send out is the small estate coffee from an estate called Kiahia Estate. As far as I know, it's situated in Nyeri. I haven't been there, but I bought this through an exporter called Kahavabora, which is quite new. It's part of the Sukafina Corporation. And the reason why I went there to cup coffees was because we're buying some other coffees from some other farmers called What New, and they decided to change kind of exporter or marketing agent to Kahava Bora from Coffee Enough, which they worked with last year. And this is kind of the thing in Kenya, is that a lot of these factories will change partners that they sell their coffee through. So I kind of have to work with different exporters in order to access different coffees. And some years I'm not able to access them because they're sold in the market before I'm even there, and so on. So it's a different type of work than we normally do when we work in Colombia. We work with one farmer. You know, we can go into that farm and help them progress, and we can cup all the coffees from that farm and select the best coffees and help them plant new varieties and so on. In Kenya, this is much more difficult because most of the farmers have very, very little pieces of land, maybe half a hectare, maybe a couple of 100 coffee trees. It's really difficult to kind of work directly because you would have to work with a lot of them. But a small estate might be a little bit bigger, and this estate was producing 10 bags of the double A, which we bought, and then 2 bags of the pea berry that we also bought. This coffee, wow, it's really, really nice. The acidity is quite intense. It's kind of like tamarind, if you drink tamarind juice, and a little rose hippie as well. Like when I say rose hips, you can also think of Flor de Jamaica or hibiscus, or Jamaica flower if you want. Really, really nice coffee, very intense, nice body. Also with this kind of blackcurrant purple berry profile that Kenya is so famous for. Now I recommend not only tasting the Kenyan coffees, but I also recommended tasting it in contrast to another thing. And I have 3 contrasting coffees here, one from Honduras, one from Colombia, and then a very dark roasted coffee from Brazil. And it's going to be quite fun to taste the Kenya after you've tasted one of those, so let's try that. This is the dark roast from Brazil. It's roasted so dark that, you know, there's no kind of mouthfeel anymore. Yeah, the coffee feels strong, but it's actually just bitter. It tastes a little burnt. These beans were quite black when I ground them. Let's go from that to, let's say, the Gachatha. Now you can really taste that the mouthfeel is so thick and rich, and I got a lot more of that kind of rose hippie flavor. It tastes almost like really, yeah, tart grapes and rose hips. I'm gonna do the same with the Colombian. This is the coffee from Finca Tamana. Normally you would say this is very sugary, like brown sugar, caramel. But when you compare it to a Kenyan coffee, you can get this kind of herbalness, like a slight green bell pepper flavor. And that's because it's a hybrid variety, Variedad Colombia. And they normally have a little bit of this kind of herbalness. So let's go from that, let's say, to the Karinga. Wow, brings out a little bit of raspberries and this kind of blackberry flavor in the Karinga. You can also feel that the Kenyan coffee is so intense in both the acidity and also the mouthfeel is really, really kind of round and thick and smooth. Oh, and it's so winey, it's like drinking red wine. Now let's go to the Honduran. This is Catuai from Caballeros. Also quite herbal, like green bell pepper, very chocolatey, like milk chocolate. So take a couple of sips of a coffee like that. And then maybe go back to one of the Kenyans. I'm tasting the Kiahia now. Wow, tastes like cherry candy. That's so cool. Tastes like these kind of cherries, sour cherries, but they're kind of like the ones you get in cocktails that have this kind of marzipan flavor as well. Really, really good. And this is what's so fun about cupping. You can really taste the difference when you have some contrasting coffee on the table. Tasting the difference between 3 Kenyan coffees is much more challenging for even for a professional coffee buyer like myself, because they have very, very similar style. So yeah, you might get some nuances here and there, but you won't kind of, once you've cupped 100 of these Kenyans next to each other, you don't really taste that they're fruity until you bring something very contrasting on the table and like, wow, they're so fruity, all of them. That's just because it's kind of like when you walk into a barn and there's animals there and it's kind of smelly and you know, you don't want to be there, but after 5 minutes, you don't really notice that bad smell. You get used to it. It's kind of the same when you taste many Kenyan coffees next to each other. You kind of get used to that fruity flavor, so it's good to have something contrasting that can kind of remind you, okay, this is where I am, and then you go back and like, wow, this is so fruity. I hope you enjoyed this little mini cupping session. We will make sure to make a little video about the grind setting for V60 and AeroPress for our subscribers. But we need to roast the coffees first. These were actually a sample roast that I did because the coffees just arrived. So they're a little fresh, but we'll make sure to test them properly before we send them out because we really want these coffees to be 100% when you get them. Cool, anything else? Yes, we need to talk about shipping. Shipping these days, we know that a lot of you haven't gotten your coffee yet from both April and May. If you're still waiting for those coffees, please email us and we will help you out. We have had a lot of trouble with the postal service, not in Norway necessarily, but the post gets congested in Europe and then going to Asia and the US, you know, it's a nightmare. So we're getting word out that people are starting to get their coffees. Shipping times can still be anywhere between 2 and 6 weeks, so you don't really know what's going to happen, especially if you don't track your shipments. We are working on a solution that might be very pleasing to many of you. Maybe looking at an alternative to FedEx that is a little bit cheaper, so hopefully that will come soon. But if you want coffee guaranteed within a week, FedEx is our only option at the moment. The postal service might take 2 to 6 weeks if you live outside of Norway. If you're in Norway, normal shipping times are between 2 to 7 days. So they say 5 working days. We also need to talk about our subscriptions because we just opened up for 6-bag subscriptions, which means you are now able to subscribe to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 bags if you want to. And we also introduced a mixed bag subscription, which means you can choose if you want 2 bags of espresso and 4 bags of filter, for instance. We can put that into the same package and send it. We finally cracked that code, so now we can get up to 6 bags per month. And when we have 6 bags, we will most likely send out 2 Gachatha, 2 bags of Karinga and 2 bags of Kiahia. At least that's what we're gonna do now. And maybe in the future, when we have some extra special stuff, we will send out maybe 4 different coffees, maybe 5 different coffees, maybe even 6 different coffees. But in general, we will still continue sending out 3 different coffees because it's we're a small roastery and we don't buy that many coffees. Although last year I think we bought close to 60 different lots, so we just received 17 different lots from the Caballeros, for instance. So we have to see how it tastes like, and if they're very similar, we don't want to complicate things. So that's how it works. If you want to subscribe, you can go to our webpage, click on subscriptions. There's a mixed bag subscription. There's a Tim's Picks, which is the one we're talking about now, and you can pause it at any time. You can upgrade it or downgrade it at any time. It's quite easy. Once you're logged in, click on My Subscriptions, and then you can do everything from there. Cool, that's almost it for now. If you want to know how I brew these coffees for iced coffees, we have a separate video for that on YouTube, so you can check that out. We'll put that in a link below. And I highly recommend trying it, although don't panic when I mention the word sugar. It has actually a very, very nice effect. If you put some sweetener in, you will get much more of that fruitiness when the coffee is cold. So I highly recommend doing it. It's a big hit in our coffee shop when we serve it in summer. And it's a really nice and refreshing drink. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.